May I ask representatives to take their seats so that we can go on with the list of presidents speaking. We need more silence in the hall. Please. Shall we go on? Now, you think? We need silence. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Andrzej Duda, President of the Republic of Poland. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Andrzej Duda, President of the Republic of Poland, and invite him to address the Assembly.
Szanowny Panie Sekretarzu Generalny,
Distinguished Mr. Secretary General,
Szanowny Panie Przewodniczący,
Distinguished Mr. President, Excellencies,
dostojni delegaci, Szanowni Państwo,
honorable delegates, ladies and gentlemen,
gratuluję
I congratulate the President of the 70th session of the UN General Assembly, Mr. Mogens Lykketoft, on his election to this honorable office. I wish to assure you, Mr. President, about Poland's full support to your actions.
Panie Przewodniczący,
Mr. President,
Szanowni Państwo,
ladies and gentlemen,
pokój i prawo.
peace and law.
Dwa słowa klucze,
These are the two key words which allow us to realize and appreciate
Please listen to the President in silence.
dzięki którym jesteśmy w stanie zrozumieć
These are
i
the
docenić
two
rolę
key
Narodów
words which allow us
Zjednoczonych
to understand and
w ostatnich
appreciate the
70
importance of the
latach
United
historii
Nations in the last 70 years of the world's history.
Dwa
Peace
słowa,
and law.
bez których nie
Two
sposób
words,
wyobrazić sobie
without which
współistnienia
it is
narodów,
impossible to imagine coexistence of
grup
nations,
etnicznych,
ethnic groups,
wyznawców różnych religii.
followers of different religions.
Pokój i prawo,
Peace and law.
pojęcia piękne,
They are beautiful notions, important,
aczkolwiek nader kruche,
but extremely
które
fragile.
musimy dbać,
The ones which we need
które
to
musimy
take care of,
bez ustanku pielęgnować.
which need to be cultivated
My
unceasingly.
Polacy
We, the
wiemy
Poles,
doskonale, że
know
pokój
fully well
nie jest
that
dany raz na
peace
zawsze.
is not to be taken for
Niespełna
granted.
miesiąc temu
Less than 1 month
przypadł mi
ago,
honor jako
it was
prezydentowi
incumbent on me,
Rzeczypospolitej
as President of the
Polskiej
Republic of Poland,
wygłoszenia przemowy
to
podczas
deliver a speech
uroczystości
at the commemoration of the 76th anniversary of the outbreak of World War II.
1 września
At the dawn of September the 1st, 1939,
o świcie rozpoczęła się
the
inwazja
invasion
nazistowskich
of Nazi
Niemiec
Germany
na moją
against
ojczyznę.
my home country was unleashed.
17 dni później,
17 days later,
17 września
on the 17th of September 1939, we received a blow from the other side. The USSR attacked Poland, and Poland vanished from the map.
Ale Polacy są dumnym
However,
narodem.
the Poles are a proud
Nie
nation,
poddali się.
and they did not give up,
Bo cenią sobie wolność.
because what they love above all is freedom, and that is why they fought till the end on the side of the free world.
Ta wojna,
The war,
druga wojna światowa,
the Second World War,
największa,
was
najbardziej
greatest
krwawa
and the
dziejach
most bloody in mankind's history.
pogrążyła w mroku zbrodni,
It made
barbarzyństwa
the
i cierpień całą Europę,
whole Europe,
wschodnią i
East and Southeast
południowo-wschodnią
Asia,
Azję,
North
północną
Africa,
Afrykę, Bliski
the Middle
Wschód
East,
i
all
wszystkie
the
oceany.
oceans plunge in the dark rain of
Jedną z
crime,
pierwszych
barbarity,
ofiar
and
tamtej
suffering.
wojny było prawo
It was
międzynarodowe.
international law which fell one of the first victims of the war back then. The next one was human rights, starting from the fundamental right to live and ending with the rights of soldiers in combat, rights of civilians crushed under bomb raids, rights of refugees. The scale of terror, destruction and lawlessness committed those days put international community to a serious test. A need appeared to step up efforts to protect peace and safeguard it for the future. The year 1945 is more than the end of World War II. It is also the origin of the United Nations, the most fundamental mechanism for cooperation in international community for the sake of global peace and security. In 1945, also international criminal courts were set up. The criminal courts, the Nuremberg and the Tokyo ones. Finally, the 1940s also marked the adoption of two particularly crucial documents, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, whose concept was largely laid down by Rafał Lemkin, a great Pole of Jewish descent, an eminent lawyer and university lecturer, nominated to the Nobel Peace Prize. Lemkin was fluent in 9 languages, but he was most fluent in the language of law. He noted an absence of one important word. It was Lemkin who invented and applied in professional literature the term genocide for the first time. Ludobójstwo in Polish. The Polish lawyer had a direct experience of it. Almost all of his family perished, murdered in German annihilation camps. The emphasis on respect of international law, as well as unconditional penalization of those responsible for war crimes, was meant to be one of ways and means to prevent bloody conflict in the future. As Pope John Paul II observed, peace and international law are closely linked to each other. Law favors peace. Unfortunately, international treaties are still violated, solemn pledges are neglected, and human rights are commonly trampled. We should constantly recall this fact. There is never too much of reminding that international law is a fundamental value and a fundamental tool to build peace in the world. That no declarations made by leaders of states, no promises, no entreaties will replace treaties, conventions, and resolutions. No negotiations behind closed doors may ever lead to violation of the former, to the trampling of them. All states should be afforded equal enjoyment of rights vested in them, and any actions undermining these rules should be firmly rejected by international community and the global community. Poland, so gravely affected by World War II and by over 40 years long time of oppression from the communist regime, is particularly sensitive to the use of force in relations between states, to the use of armed aggression, to violation of human rights. Poland feels it is incumbent on her to remind that such methods are not only immoral, not only incompatible with a broadly understood humanism, but above all, they are in contradiction with international law. That is why I would like to reiterate with all my might, in a situation when a state perpetrates an aggression, leading its international policy of accomplished facts, employing tanks, missiles and bombs, the international community has an obligation to reject the facts accomplished through such an action. In this connection, it is crucially important to continue the work on streamlining the effectiveness of the United Nations Security Council, the body responsible for protection of international peace. It must be constantly recalled that the privilege of permanent membership is connected with the duty to take active measures to implement UN fundamental goals, as mentioned in Article 1 of the Charter. In recent years, the right to veto led on many occasions to a total stalemate of the Council works on the most important security issues precisely. This is why Poland supports the French proposal to adopt a code of procedure for refraining from a veto in the event when we are confronted with gravest crimes in the sense of international law, including the crime of genocide. Ladies and gentlemen, let us have a look at the world today, which is so much trouble-ridden. How many millions of people suffer from war, destitution, famine, or religious persecutions? Can we afford to circumvent the principles enshrined in the UN Charter? Should we be turning a blind eye to the breach of commitments once made, on actions taken from the position of power and of accomplished facts? Should we wave aside legal manipulations and propaganda activities which seek to justify unworthy actions and illegal ones? The answer is no, and this has to be an answer of every decent and honest human person and politician. The President of the Republic of Poland, Professor Lech Kaczyński, while addressing this forum in this hall back in 2009, pointed out that violation of territorial integrity of states always gives rise to conflicts on a global scale. Today, I would also like, in my capacity as President of Poland, to express, on behalf of my country, the opposition to the world built on the division of zones of influence and aggression perpetrated by those who, driven by their interests and ambitions, ignore provisions of international law, thus thwarting the joint 70 years endeavor of the United Nations. In our part of Europe, we know too well the costs which are to be incurred as a result of such a policy, especially in the absence of decisive and joint reaction of other states in the early stage of an aggression. Distinguished delegates, contempt of international law may turn out to be the germs of war, and once a war has broken out on the territories engulfed by conflicts, usually there is no rule of law. We can see that in many parts of the world, where the institutions of the state have been either excessively strained or replaced by private armies, terrorist militias, and self-proclaimed courts. This comes as yet another challenge to the world and to the United Nations alike. More and more frequently, conflicts arise, in which one can hardly define the litigant parties, in which combat is carried out not by states, but rather by indeterminate armed groups, where it is difficult to make out a soldier from a civilian. How to adjust the present-day regulations to the new circumstances, which, in the eyes of many politicians and even specialists in international law, are still not fully researched and comprehensible. Unfortunately, one thing continues unaltered for centuries. In various quarters of the world, and on the occasion of various conflicts, freedom of conscience and religion are subject to systematic restraint. Members of religious minorities, especially Christians, are exposed to persecution. In the Middle East, the incidence of acts of violence targeting members of Christian churches is growing at an alarming pace. Let us not forget about the plight of the Yazidis community, the people murdered and evicted from their native soil. Poland appeals to the international community to take decisive steps to protect the rights of religious minorities. Military conflicts in the Middle East take the toll of thousands of innocent lives, violating social and economic stability of the region. The militants of the so-called Islamic State pillage museums, defile Christian and Shia shrines, blowing up the remains of ancient metropolis. At the end of August, we were informed about the destruction of the temple Baal Shamin, almost 200 years old. UNESCO Director General Irina Bokova stated that the devastation of the temple constitutes no less than a war crime. In the face of those beastly acts, international community should take more decisive steps in order to stem the practice of destroying and looting the world heritage. Distinguished delegates, from the very outset of the UN existence, international community has never had to struggle with a humanitarian crisis of such a scale as in the present day. Poland works to reinforce the global system of humanitarian aid through fostering cooperation among international institutions, governments, and non-governmental organizations. At the same time, one should place a more intense emphasis on the relationship between humanitarian aid and development aid. At this point, I would like to mention with great satisfaction the outputs of Polish humanitarian organizations, which lend active support to those in need. They build schools and community centers, they drill wells, provide clothes and blankets, they assist victims of various conflicts, they respond to the aftermath of natural disasters. At this occasion, I would like to express my most sincere gratitude to all the kind-hearted people, to people of conscience who are providing assistance to others, sometimes risking their own lives. Respect of human rights is a key premise for the maintenance of peace and justice in lives of states and nations. For Poland, of particular importance is the defense of freedom of conscience, worship, and speech. And freedom of speech entails the duty to tell the truth. Nothing is more poisonous to the relations among nations and states than manipulating truth, than lies or degrading stereotypes. That is why truth, also the truth about history, is such a crucial component of relations among states and nations. At this point, I would like to highlight the fate of those for whom standing up for truth and for freedom of speech is often punished with imprisonment and even death at the hands of their oppressors. People who are courageous and uncompromising, dissidents, journalists, bloggers, who bring to the daylight crimes of totalitarian regimes, atrocities perpetrated by terrorists in various corners of the world, brutality of law enforcement bodies. We cannot forget their dedication. An international community should offer them an appropriate protection, also in the legal context. And here comes one more social group, which we cannot left out when speaking about human rights, about the aftermath of war and mass migrations. Whom I have in mind is women, mothers, wives and daughters, in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, in Ukraine. They require our particular solicitude, since they suffer twice as much. First, when they lose their sense of security, knowing that warfare is raging around, and then when they lose their husbands, fathers, brothers, sons, and sometimes cannot even bury them. The tears of a woman distressed with a war is the greatest charge against humanity in the 21st century. Distinguished delegates, the defense of democracy, sustainable economic growth, leveling of social inequalities, broader access to education, long-term mitigation of impacts of climate change, all of the above measures contribute to the preservation of peace worldwide. In this context, I wish to assure you about my country's readiness to participate in the attainment of sustainable development goals. Poland actively participates, among others, in the international effort to arrive at a new climate agreement. We see the need for the permanent understanding to be reached in this field, one which will be joined by all states and that will engage efforts of all in proportion to their actual capabilities.
Polska ma.
Poland has,
Skądinąd nie bagatela.
otherwise, an impressive track record in climate protection.
Wystarczy wspomnieć,
Suffice it to say that our economic transformation contributed to the lowering of CO2 emissions in Poland by 30% in relation to 1990.
gotowi jesteśmy
We also stand ready to increase our direct contribution to peacekeeping and preservation of security.
motywowane właśnie
This is also the motive
jest także zgłoszenie
behind the
naszej
submission of our candidacy for the Security Council non-permanent membership.
Szanowni delegaci,
Honorable delegates, Poland,
wciąż pamiętająca tragedię II
still
wojny
mindful
światowej
of the
i czasy
tragedy of the
komunizmu,
World War II and of communist times, pledges to actively cooperate in building international order
opartego na
founded
prawie.
on law.
Prawo sprzyja
Law contributes to
efektywnego
effective
funkcjonowaniu
functioning of
społeczeństw,
societies
które tworzą
of
państwo.
which states are made, but also to effective and peaceful arrangements among states themselves.
Twórzmy
Let us
świat
therefore create the
oparty na
world
sile
founded on the force of law and not on the law of force. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Poland for his statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the President.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.